Hi, this is Adam Eliel Berkowitz from Israel 365 News. I'm here with a remarkable man, David Rubin from Shiloh. He's the former mayor of Shiloh, and he also started the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund, which works to heal the trauma of children who were victims of terrorist attacks. And he has a remarkable story about how he started out on that. So, David, thank you very much for joining us. Could you tell us a little bit about how you started out the Shiloh Children's Fund?
Certainly, I've told this story many times, and I will tell it again. We're talking about an actual event, been 20 years ago, and I was in Jerusalem. And why was I in Jerusalem? Because it was the last day of Hanukkah, and the children were home. The young children were all at home, and my wife said, "Well, you're going to Jerusalem," and I said, "Yeah, I have a toothache. I have to see what's going on. It's really hurting me." And the dentist said he could take me. So I said, "Okay, I'm going into Jerusalem." And she said, "Well, look, it's the last day of the vacation, and they had been home. Children had been home for almost a whole week." And my wife said, "If you're going, you got to at least take a couple of them." So I said, "Okay." So she asked my 7-year-old daughter if she wants to come with me, and she said, "Well, she's playing with friends. She doesn't want to be interrupted." Okay. My 5-year-old was asked, and she said, "You going to Jerusalem?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Are the Arabs there?" And I said, "Well, yeah, there are some Arabs, but it's okay. You don't need to be concerned." She said, "Well, if there are Arabs there, I don't want to go there." Now you have to understand there had already been a lot of terrorist attacks, so people were very on edge, including a lot of the children. So I took my 3-year-old son with me because he wasn't going to say no, and he came with me to Jerusalem. Okay, I went to the dentist. Dentist said he doesn't see anything, everything is fine. And I said, "But I have this pain." He said, "It could just be food in the gums. Don't worry about it. Just, brush your teeth better." Okay, so I took my son out for dinner, a burger and fries dinner, and then we had a really good time. We went for haircuts after that, and then we headed back. We began our journey back to Shiloh, right, which most people in the English-speaking world know as Shiloh. Okay, but we call it by its original biblical term, Shiloh. Okay, so we're on our way to Shiloh. Halfway home, on this dark country road, okay, which is the original road of the patriarchs, slightly rerouted and repaved, but the original road of the patriarchs. Now we call it Route 60. And we head on our journey home. Halfway home, the car is hit with a massive hail of bullets. There apparently were terrorists with AK-47 assault rifles from the Palestinian Authority on the side of the road, shooting at the car. The car went completely dead when the bullets hit. I felt one crash into my left leg. Blood started pouring out all over the place. And I tried to start the car, and my head was already spinning probably from the loss of blood, and the leg pounding. I was shifting gears, doing whatever I could. The car wasn't starting. It was dead. Then I remembered I had my 3-year-old son sitting behind me. I asked him if he was okay. His eyes were staring straight ahead, wide open. His mouth was open. He looked like he was trying to scream or to cry, but no sounds were coming out. I, again, I tried to start the car, figuring he's just in shock, and I turned the ignition again and again and again. Finally, the car started as if it had never had a problem starting before. I hit the gas. I drove 170 miles an hour to get, 170 kilometers an hour. That's about 110 miles an hour to get to the terrorists who were up the road, who I didn't think were going to follow me up the road because they were on the side of the road, apparently without a car. And so I got away from the terrorists, thinking I was going to get to the next community up the road and get an ambulance. The car was shaking the whole time. My blood was pouring out of my leg the whole time. Finally, I get to the community up the road. I call for an ambulance, and guard at the gate didn't seem to hear me as I was shouting. Who came running to the car, and he ripped off my shirt. He wrapped up, stopped the blood flow. Ambulance had already been called, apparently. And I told her I've been in the leg. Our son is okay. And sure enough, a minute later, an ambulance zooms up, and two paramedics jump out of the ambulance. They one of them takes my son in the car, and he shouts. He's also been shot. He's been shot in the head. A bullet, apparently, we later found out, had gone into his head, neck, causing the skull, cerebellum. Well, they wrapped him up with bandages around his head. They put an oxygen mask. They both of us on stretchers into the ambulance and took us to the hospital in Jerusalem. And we got to the hospital in Jerusalem. They put us in separate emergency rooms, and they get to work on us. And as they're working on us, the head surgeon comes up to me and he says, "David, we're going to have to operate on both of you within half an hour. And it'll probably be the first of several operations. I just wanted to let you know that. And there's someone who wants to ask you a couple of questions." So I look at this other guy who's standing next to the surgeon, and he says, David, I just want you to know that the media is massed outside this emergency room. They want to interview you and your son, or photograph you and your son, and I can keep them away. I'll protect your privacy if you so wish. That's my job. I'm the public relations director of this hospital. And I thought for a second, I thought of all the terror attacks. And I had already had a friend who was killed in a terror. I knew others who were wounded. I said, you know what? You bring them in here. I have what to say to them. And I've been telling this story ever since. And I tell the story not just because of our personal trauma. And yes, we've suffered a lot. And my whole family has suffered a lot. But I also felt very angry that this problem of the terrorism wasn't being taken care of, and that the whole world was criticizing Israel when we're the ones who are being shot and wounded every day.
Not only are we being shot and wounded, but as your case so graphically illustrated, we're talking about children, fathers going out to the dentist. We're not talking about people who are actively looking to mix it up, actively looking to be aggressive or violent. We're talking about people trying to live their lives.
Yes.
I actually like the fact that we're seeing The you're sitting in a room of your house. People who live in like Shiloh, we're talking about people who are trying to live just a very simple, nice life, raise their children, and out of the middle of nowhere, they are being attacked as they just live their lives, and
Yes.
that's what happened to you.
Well, that's quite true, and that's quite disturbing, and especially since it's been continuing to this day.
Mm,
But yes, we suffered our trauma, and there were others who suffered that trauma, and I was upset that that it wasn't being taken care of, and that the world is criticizing us for trying to live our daily lives. And yes, there is a very fundamental qualitative difference between an Arab resident of the land of Israel who goes out with an AK-47 and starts shooting at civilians on the road, and then possibly gets wounded himself in the process.
right.
There was a huge difference between people who go and with rocks and bullets, and they attack Israelis, and then perhaps have some sort of trauma afterwards. I mean, how can anyone
We're also
compare the
seeing
two?
something.
Uh,
First of all,
so
you made a strong point in that this was 20 years ago, and you were like, why didn't they take care of this? And 20 years later, the Israeli government still hasn't taken care of it. I think it's, we can blame the Israeli government. We can talk about who's to blame. But your son was very seriously wounded. But now there's the big thing. Oh, but Palestinian children are being hurt. But these children, they're being shot with guns in their hands. They're being sent out to murder Jews. They're not sitting at home playing Nintendo.
oh,
So,
that's for sure. That's for sure. So let me just say this, okay? I just want to give a little credit where credit is due. And, in that terror attack, we discovered all of the wounds and the damage. And my son did eventually recover from those physical wounds. Uh, Psychological wounds, that's another story. But he recovered from the physical wounds. But the fact is that the bullet that went into his head and through his neck missed his brainstem by 1 millimeter. And the bullet that shot me in my left leg missed my right leg, which enabled me to drive my automatic car to get to that ambulance. And furthermore, on my fifth day in the hospital, I get a call from the car mechanic who said, David, we want to know why we can't start that car. Now, I know that the bullets hit. I know the car went dead. I know I tried over and over and over and over again to get the car to start. And as one who grew up in New York, in the winter cold of New York, and knows that if you turn the ignition more than 2 or 3 times within a minute, the car is not going to start, and you're just going to overload it. Well, that car started as if it had never had a problem starting before. So, I just want to give thanks to the Almighty for getting us to that ambulance, for getting us to the hospital, and for saving our lives in that respect. So, okay, having said all that, I just want your viewers to be aware that what ultimately came out of that, after we saw the psychological trauma, we saw the emotional trauma, what came out of it is the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund, which I established for the purpose of healing the trauma of the terror victim children and restoring some of the lost innocence to their lives, thereby also rebuilding the biblical heartland of Israel through the children. those are the goals of the wonderful organization that I have merited to build. And we say in Hebrew, "Hakol l'tova," everything is for good. And it doesn't mean that everything that happens is good. We know that bad things happen to good people, but what it means is that everything happens for a good reason. So a lot of good came out of this horrible experience that we went through, and that we unfortunately have continued to go through on and off through the years, dealing with emotional trauma. And so many hundreds of families have suffered from similar forms of trauma.
Yeah, I actually, my wife, when she was 7 months pregnant with their first child, she survived a terrorist attack, mamish, through a total miracle. It was an absolute miracle. But what happened was when I was like, she's fine. I got my wife back. Let's forget it ever happened. And ever since then, I think we've been working at how we didn't take care of it when it first happened. And we read in the news. I put out a news story today. There were 3 young Israelis killed this week, similar to the case you were in, drive-by shootings. Which I want to ask you how you felt about it. But what people don't realize is even if it doesn't make the news, they have the unfortunate expression, if it bleeds, it leads, meaning that's what makes the headlines. But when it comes to terrorist attacks, when you hear just about, oh, they were wounded, that just changed their life. Even if they weren't wounded, they lived through a terrorist attack where someone was trying to kill them. These are major life events that require some serious care, and even more so if they were actually physically wounded. So what you're doing is trying to take care of a major life crisis, even if the person, God forbid, even if they lived or were only wounded, it's a major event that requires some serious care.
Yes. So let me say this. First of all, we were top news. Okay, we were on the front page of all newspapers here in Israel, and a little bit in America too, probably because I was an American citizen and still am, as is my son, and probably because my son was 3 years old. So that I imagine that's why we got most of the attention. But most of the time, and there was another terror victim, another person who was killed that day, just an hour before ours. Now, important to understand that usually when an Israeli is wounded, it does not make the news, period. And very often when an Israeli is killed, it does not make the news, period. Okay, a lot of the main news outlets did not touch the story of the 3
Or they
Israelis
presented
killed.
in a uniquely horrible and twisted manner. Like I saw one, was it, I think it might have been CNN. They were talking about how an Israeli was killed while he was driving in the Jordan Valley, and they said hours after Israelis riot in Hawara, drive-by shooting kills Israeli. And I'm just like, wow, they really had to work hard to avoid saying the truth on that one.
Yeah, twisting it around, and yes, we know what happened in Hawara. There were 2 young Israelis who were murdered while driving by in their car. Their car was shot at. They were both shot and killed in that terror attack. And then there are some Israelis who lost their cool and went and retaliated by burning a few cars. Now, let me say this, okay? Important for people to understand this. This is what is not being mentioned in the media. That for the past 25 years, what am I saying? More than that, yeah. even more than that. Israelis that drive through that Arab village of Huwawa, that radical Muslim village, are having their cars shot at, are having rocks thrown at their cars, and are putting their lives in danger literally by driving on that road. But there is no other road through which they can get to Jerusalem, and there is no other road through which they can get to Tel Aviv or any of the other major cities in Israel. So they're basically sitting ducks, driving through a hostile town, and I totally understand them for wanting to react when for 25 years the Israeli government has not been solving the problem, and the American government has been pressuring the Israeli government not to solve the problem, as they are also pressuring now. There was a statement from the State Department criticizing Israel.
And they equate the violence. They
For
say
this terror.
they equate the violence. And I was like, this could be solved in 5 minutes if the Palestinians stopped killing Jews. So when you hear about a drive-by shooting, you actually lived through a drive-by shooting. Even worse, you lived through a drive-by shooting with your son, which I'm sorry, David, I can't even think about it. It's too big for me. So when you hear about a drive-by shooting now, where two brothers are driving home from a Torah lesson, and they get shot out, that must be a really hard thing for you to hear.
Terrible. It's terrible, and it's like reliving it every time.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I look, we're just trying to live our lives as those two boys were trying to live their lives. One who's a driver, one who was a passenger. They're young men, 22 and 20 years old, just trying to live their daily lives. They were attacked, they were murdered, their lives were taken from them brutally. And this is something that shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't be allowed. And all honest people whose intentions are really good should be standing up and shouting about this. And I have to think that it must be just hatred of Jews or kowtowing to a left-wing agenda that is radical. And unfortunately, I had to write about all this in my book, Confronting Radicals, What America Can Learn from Israel, because this is something that we've learned. We've learned through suffering the past 25 years here in Israel, especially in the past 25 years, when the terrorism has been the most intense.
So,
and you cannot equate terrorism against Israeli civilians with Israelis adding a room to their home. And we who live in Shiloh, in the first capital of ancient Israel, Israel's capital for 369 years. That's longer than Washington, D.C. has been the capital of the United States. So we're talking about serious war crimes that are being carried out against us.
So David, I have a question. I know you. You're a really sweet guy. Your family is everything to you. You're just trying to live a normal life. People who go to Shiloh, I think they would be really shocked. They talk about settlement. It's a town. It's almost like the town I grew up in New Jersey. It's very suburban. Why do you stay? It's dangerous, isn't it? Why would you stay?
Well, look, there are Israelis who ask that question.
Sure.
And they will ask me that question. And there are Americans and people from New Zealand and Australia and England and other places who would ask any Israeli that question. And the answer is very simple. This is our home. And even bigger than that, this is the land that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob gave us as an eternal inheritance, to cherish it, to build it, and yes, to rebuild it when it needs to be rebuilt. And that is what we're trying to do here. But yes, I will not say that it's a crazy question, because it's a sensible question. And that's my answer.
It's
So maybe your follow-up question will be, well, what about the children
what about the children?
who didn't come with your passion and your devotion to the land of Israel and the God of Israel? Well, it's very simple. We have to take care of those children. We have to help them. We have to heal that trauma. And we have to help to restore the lost innocence to their lives as much as we possibly can. And that's what we're trying to do at the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund. And thank God we have people from all around the world who are helping us to do it.
Thank God. Thank God indeed. It's like I said, you're just trying to live your life. And that's, I think, what God wanted, is for Jews to come and live in Israel. It's really that simple. We don't have any agenda. Some people, gosh, I've unfortunately, I spend too much time on social media, and people are saying, oh, they deserve it because they live on Palestinian land. First of all, that's a lie. It's not Palestinian land. Second of all, so is that a good reason to kill Jews? They've never needed a reason to kill Jews. And if we can't live here in peace, there's really no place we can live in peace. History has shown us that. So you're establishing a Jewish homeland, and for the reason that God gave it to us, and he told us to be here. And you're not stealing, you're not attacking, and yet you're being attacked. And that's the real tragedy, I think.
Well, let's just look at that first statement that you made, in which you were quoting some critics of Israel. You said you're taking Palestinian land. Okay, most people don't even know what that means.
Right.
The word Palestine comes from the Romans. Okay, so people think, okay, what Romans? People who live in Rome, Italy today? No, we're talking about 1,900 years ago, when the Roman conquerors of the land of Israel took over. They brutally killed Jews, and they exiled most of the Jews from the land of Israel, and they said that they are going to change the name of the land of Israel from Israel. Okay, and there was another part of Israel that was called Judea, and they would change the name to Palestina, giving it a Roman derivative of the word Philistines, who were another enemy of Israel's. Isn't that interesting?
Which actually means in Hebrew intruders.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And
That's
Arabs
right.
can't even
Hebrew,
pronounce the word, so it's kind of
in Hebrew the word is polshim, and yeah, the Arabs pronounce the word as bolshim, which had very meaning, but they don't even understand that, and the reason they don't understand it is because there were no Muslims at that time.
at the time of the Romans, very much not.
Islam was established 700 years ago. I mean, in the year 700.
So I have a question. I've been actually hearing
and,
something.
And that's what's.
I've been hearing something I haven't heard.
Yeah, let me just finish what I
Oh,
was.
sorry. I'm sorry.
Before your question, if I could. Okay, so so they don't even know, and they didn't even know, and they never identified as Palestinians. Palestinians was a term that was created by the Romans. It stuck, yes. Yes, the Jews prayed for 1,900 years to the land of Israel, facing the land of Israel, and praying for the revival of the Jewish homeland in the land of Israel. But when we started coming back in the early part of the 20th century, there were a lot of Jews coming back, working the land, draining the swamps, and no, draining the swamps does not mean Donald Trump and Washington. Okay, it has nothing to do with Donald Trump and Washington. He didn't invent the term. The expression comes from the Jews who were working the land of Israel, who were harvesting, who did all the hard work before the harvesting, and got down in the mud and built up the land of Israel again. Well, there were some Jewish families here in the 1930s, and some of them were massacred for living here. Because guess what? There were Arabs moving to the land of Israel in the early 20th century also. Why were those Muslims moving to the land of Israel? Because there were jobs, because Israel was building up an economy. Okay, that's the fact. Those are the facts. Okay, so there was a family living here in Jerusalem, in Israel, in Jerusalem, actually. Yeah, and they were my wife's grandparents, and her grandfather moved to America temporarily to look for work because it was hard to find work here in Israel. A lot of people were really starving and suffering. So he went to America in 1941. Okay, and they had a 2-year-old baby at that time. And that was my father-in-law. May his memory be a blessing. And so his mother was here. That was my wife's grandmother, who was living here by herself with my wife's father, who was a baby. And because of World War II, my wife's grandfather couldn't make it back to the land of Israel. And he ended up staying there, and he found work there. And at the end of the Second World War, he brought his wife and son to America because that's where he had work. Okay, so that's a little of the background of this story. So, but my late father-in-law lived in Israel for the first few years of his life until he was 7 years old. And at that time, everyone was still calling it Palestine, still using the fictional term from the Romans. And he said that most of the Jewish kids called themselves Palestinian Jews.
Right.
But the Arabs refused to call themselves Palestinians.
Because they were Arabs.
Yeah, they were just Arabs. They said, we're part of the Arab Muslim nation. And we're not what Palestinians. You are the Palestinians, you Jews. And so that's a story that my father-in-law repeated many times. It's important to understand that Palestine is a fictional term.
Not only is it a fiction,
that you will not read it.
Not only is it a fiction, I remember once I got into an interesting dialogue with some anti-Israel people who came from Europe, and they were touring around where I lived on Kibbutz Deliau in the Beit Shan Valley, and they said, look around, you Jews took all the good land and left the desert and bad places for the Arabs. And I tried to explain to them, no, we built it up. And also there's a very special relationship between Jews and the land of Israel. When we get together with the land, it brings down a very special blessing, and the land is blessed. And it's visible, it's tangible. So when I go out to Shiloh,
Not only is it visible, yep, not only is it visible and tangible, but it's prophesied.
exactly.
And it says in the prophecies in the book of Ezekiel and book of Jeremiah, they state very clearly, okay? By the way, this is why I am not an atheist, because I learned these prophecies and they're all true.
Mm.
So how can you deny that there is a God of Israel when you read these prophecies? It says that when Israel is banished from the land of Israel, and that was also prophecy, the land will not give of its fruit. The land will lay barren. And indeed, it did lay barren for 1,900 years. When Mark Twain came to visit in the 19th century, he said, "This is a decrepit, forsaken land. There is hardly a tree, there is hardly a flower or a plant, and hardly any people." And that's prophecy. And it also said in the prophecies that when Israel comes back to the land, that the land will give of its fruit, that there will be almond trees and pomegranate trees, and the land will give of its fruit again. And anyone who's come to Israel recently knows that the desert is blooming. So this is very real. This isn't
Mm.
something that is, it's not the stuff of fiction like the word Palestine.
Okay, David, I have this rule that I love to leave my viewers wanting more. So we're going to end this here. I'd like to invite you back soon. We're going to finish or continue this amazing story. Unfortunately, Israel is in the coping with terrorism and its after effects is not a disappearing industry. We're still doing that, and you're still your work is still very much needed in Israel. So I hope to invite you back to continue this discussion. I'd like to thank my viewers because you're becoming involved in saving Am Yisrael. Thank you so much, y'all, and be blessed.